Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
It feels like everywhere you turn these days, everyone's talking about the economy, right?
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
And not always in a good way.
Right.
So today we're diving into collapso.txt, which lays out a pretty stark economic picture.
Okay.
But, and this is important, folks, we're not just here to tell you the sky is falling.
No, not at all.
We're all about giving you the insights you need to navigate choppy waters.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So collapso.txt, this source argues that the real danger isn't necessarily a sudden crash, but more of a slow burn.
Yeah, the slow boil, they call it.
Right. And the idea is that governments are basically kicking the can down the road, papering over problems with things like, inflation.
Which might seem fine in the short term, but right, it's like that whole boiling frog analogy, right?
Exactly. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps right out.
Of course, who wouldn't?
But slowly heat up the water. The frog doesn't realize the danger until it's too late.
Ouch. Okay, so we're not frogs, but you get the analogy, right?
Exactly. We get comfortable, complacent even,
Yeah.
and then bam, things have changed drastically.
And at that point, it might be too late.
Exactly.
So how do we know if the slow boil is really happening? I mean, are we just buying into some doomsday scenario here?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay, so collapso.txt points to some evidence, and one of the big ones is China.
Right. Their economy is often seen as kind of a bellwether for the rest of the world,
Makes sense.
and their export numbers have been seriously lagging.
Which would be a concern on its own, but they've also been trying these massive stimulus efforts, right?
Huge stimulus packages and still struggling.
So that's not a great sign, is it?
Not particularly.
Okay, then there's the job market here in the U.S.
Right. We hear about job growth.
Which sounds good on the surface.
Exactly. But collapso.txt digs deeper and highlights a pretty concerning trend. Private sector job losses.
And that's a problem
The
because
private sector, that's the engine of a healthy economy.
innovation, competition, all that good stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, and this one, I think we all feel the misery index.
Yes, the dreaded misery index.
It's basically like this measure of how much the average person is feeling the economic pinch, right?
Combining inflation and unemployment to get a sense of the real economic experience of everyday people.
So let's unpack these points a bit because they're all connected. Starting with China. Why should we here in the U.S. be worried about their economic struggles?
Well, like we said, they're kind of a leading indicator for the global economy. And the fact that they're having these issues despite all the government intervention, it suggests that maybe the current economic model, maybe it's not working quite as well as we thought.
Interesting. Okay, so then those private sector jobs.
Right. So it's important to understand the difference between public and private sector jobs.
Huh?
Public sector, that's government jobs.
Right.
And while an increase in those might seem like a good thing on paper, it can actually mask underlying problems in the private sector. Because the private sector, that's where you see real innovation, competition, and sustainable growth.
Got it. So it's not just about the raw number of jobs.
Exactly. It's about where those jobs are coming from.
Okay, and then finally the misery index.
Right. It's not just a catchy name. It reflects a very real phenomenon, this gradual decline in economic well-being. And it's something that can easily sneak up on us.
Because we get used to things slowly getting worse.
Precisely. And by the time we realize how bad it is, it might be too late to do anything about it.
That's a sobering thought.
It is, but it's also a call to action.
I like that. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. Collapso.txt offers some potential solutions as well.
Well, let's hear them then. What can we do to protect ourselves? So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. Collapso.txt offers some potential solutions as well.
Well, let's hear them then. What can we do to protect ourselves?
So collapso.txt really emphasizes this idea of diversification.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that before. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And it's especially true in this economic climate because inflation is basically eroding the value of traditional savings.
Right, right.
So collapso.txt suggests looking at assets that tend to hold their value or even increase in value during times of economic uncertainty.
Okay, so like what kind of assets are we talking about?
Well, they specifically mention gold.
Gold. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the classic safe haven, right?
Exactly. It's been a safe haven asset for centuries. And then there's cryptocurrency.
Crypto. Okay, yeah, that's a whole other world though, isn't it?
It can be a bit complex, I'll admit. But basically, it's digital currency.
Right, Bitcoin and all that.
Exactly. Bitcoin is the most famous example, but there are many others. And the appeal is that they operate independently of central banks.
So it's like a hedge against the traditional financial system. Okay, I'm starting to see the picture here. But what about those strategic U.S. stock investments that the source mentions?
Right, so it's not about abandoning the stock market altogether.
Okay,
It's about being more selective.
got it.
Collapso.txt argues that even in uncertain times, there are always sectors of the economy that will outperform others.
So it's about doing your homework, picking the right horses,
Exactly. For example, companies that focus on essential goods and services.
like food and healthcare.
Exactly. Those tend to weather economic storms better than, say, luxury goods.
Makes sense. Those are things people always need.
Right, so it's about being an informed investor.
Got it. Be smart about it.
Exactly. Now, the second big takeaway from Collapso.txt is the importance of critical thinking.
Okay, so not just taking everything you hear at face value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to information from official sources.
So be a little skeptical of those rosy economic forecasts from the government.
Exactly. Don't just blindly follow the herd.
I like
Dig a little deeper. Ask questions like, how will these policies actually be paid for? What are the potential long-term consequences?
because there are always consequences, right?
Always. And understanding the incentives at play is crucial to making sound financial decisions for yourself.
It's like that old saying, if it sounds too good to be true.
It probably is.
Right.
And that leads us to the third and perhaps most important takeaway from Collapso.txt. Information is power.
Love that one.
And I don't just mean passively consuming headlines.
Right. It's about being proactive.
Exactly. It's about being an active seeker of knowledge, digging deeper, questioning assumptions, and getting your information from diverse sources.
Which, hey, look at you. You're already doing that by listening to this deep dive.
There you go. You're ahead of the game. The more informed you are from a variety of viewpoints, the better equipped you'll be to make sound decisions for yourself and your finances, no matter what the economic future holds.
So don't bury your head in the sand.
Yeah, don't be lulled into a false sense of security.
Or paralyzed by fear-mongering.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, but only if you use it.
You know, it's funny. Collapso.txt spends all this time, talking about these big economic problems,
Right.
giving us advice and all. But there's this one thing they keep coming back to that I found really interesting.
Yeah, what's that?
It's like they mention this idea of governments wanting to control the narrative.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like if things are going so well, why are they so worried about people speaking out?
That's a great point. Collapso.txt definitely seems to suggest that, maybe some of those in power aren't being entirely forthright about the situation.
Right. Like if you've got a great product, you don't need to silence anyone who disagrees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah. Okay, so big takeaway for our listeners here. Stay curious, stay skeptical.
Absolutely. Don't just accept everything you're told at face value.
Even, and maybe especially if it's coming from someone in a position of authority.
Exactly. Question everything.
Trust but verify.
I love that. Trust but verify.
Right. It's like that old saying, if it seems too good to be true.
It probably is.
Exactly. All right, so to wrap things up today, we dove deep into Collapso.txt, explored some pretty sobering economic realities.
We did.
But hopefully you're not walking away feeling defeated.
No way.
Because knowledge is power. Absolutely.
And we've armed you with some tools and insights to not just survive, but thrive whatever the future holds.
Exactly. It's about being prepared, not scared.
Love that. All right, everyone, that's it for this deep dive. As always, thanks for listening and stay curious out there.
Take care, everyone.